I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown, a special episode, maybe my favorite episode that I do every single year, my final Oscar nominations predictions. But if you're new to the series, what I've been doing for the past 4 months has been talking about the Oscars, breaking down each category, what I think will get nominated in an in-depth video, as well as just giving my predictions for the Golden Globes, my analysis to the PGA and some of the other industry awards. But ultimately, this is Old's Oscar Countdown. We're counting down the Oscars. Everything else is a precursor, ultimately, to the final award show, the big one, the Oscars. And we're going to get the nominations this Monday. So you can watch this video, have the weekend, take your time, make your own predictions before you sort of finally submit them in. But I'm going to give you my predictions, why I chose certain movies over another, try to give you some expert analysis. Then on Monday, when the nominations come out, I will be giving my live reactions, and I'll upload that to YouTube so you can check it out, which I know you guys always love each and every year, to see how well I did and the shock on my face when I see some surprises, which we will inevitably get. But every year I think I'm going to get 100%, and this year is no different. Some categories have been really up in the air because of the strangeness of BAFTA and some of these sort of more COVID rules this year. I mean, we're doing this a whole 2 months after we really should be doing it. So it's going to be a fascinating year to see what ultimately the Oscars tell us, if we're correct or if we're more wrong than ever. But that's what's so fun about this journey and on this ride, which you guys have shown great support for. So I really do appreciate that. But continue to do that. Like the video, comment below. That stuff does really help. Now, all my predictions are in the comments below, so if you just want to see text, check there. Or if you want to hear my predictions and thoughts on best live action short or best editing, because you're unsure and you want to hear my thoughts, go to the description. There's timestamps for everything, so you can always check out and jump around at your will. But I think we should just jump into it, starting off with Best Picture. Now, more generally, a rule for these categories is that I'm not going to really talk about these sort of what I consider locks. I'm not going to go into depth and analysis and explain why I chose those movies, because most of the time, if I have a movie like something like Nomadland, it's been getting in everywhere. It has plenty of precursors. I'll mention them, but I won't go into analysis. For the most part, I'm going to go into analysis of why I chose that 5th slot instead of another movie, that 4th and 5th slot in many of the categories. And it's also worth noting that all my nominations here are ranked in alphabetical order. So they're not ranked in likelihood. I'm going to mention what the order is, but ultimately, when you look at the description, it's just going to be alphabetical order. So, Best Picture, I have The Father, Mank, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Minari, News of the World, Nomadland, One Night in Miami, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. Now, every year there's always a possibility of the Oscars nominating 10 movies, but in recent years they haven't been, because of how the sort of system works, where you have to get a certain amount of votes to actually get into the top 10. You know, you can't get 3% of the votes and slip in at number 10. So most of the time there's always 8 or 9 movies which get nominated, which this year there could be 10 very well, but I'm probably going to guess about 9 this year. But I predicted 10 just in case of the chance that there is 10. So my top 7, which I think are locks I'm not too concerned about, are Trial of Chicago 7, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, Minari, Mank, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and One Night in Miami, because of success in DGA and PGA and more general guild awards. Then I have The Father in sort of the 8th slot, because it's strong showing at BAFTA, getting in at film, getting a lot of the other sort of technical support, which was helpful for it. It was slightly surprising that it didn't get in at PGA, but I think with its recent success at BAFTA, that sort of has put it over the edge for me. Plus, you know, I think it's a lock for screenplay. I think it's a lock for supporting actress and supporting actor, so a strong above the line support, which often translates to a Best Picture nominee. And then my 9th slot, I went with Sound of Metal, because I looked at my predictions and I'm sort of betting on it. I'm betting on as the underdog movie that could, backed by Amazon, so it has some support that way and has some, you know, in terms of ad campaigns and things like that. People have been seeing Sound of Metal, but the content of the movie itself feels like a sort of smaller independent movie, a passion sort of pick that maybe an Oscar voter found themselves. But if enough Oscar voters sort of found it by themselves and were really in love with it, they could nominate it here. I think getting PGA is super massive for that movie, just showing more general support. It also did very well at BAFTA, getting in places like editing and things like that, and of course sound, so it has some technical support there. Then I looked at my nominees and I go, wow, Sound of Metal is really getting a lot. So that's what I did. Ultimately, I went with Sound of Metal in that 9th slot because I looked at it and I said, okay, I think it's getting editing. I think it's going to get supporting actor, lead actor. I think it's going to get screenplay. I think it's going to get sound. And next thing you know, it's like, well, why not? Why not get Best Picture? Because I have it in so many of the other categories. A movie like Carol was the movie that had the most nominations without getting a Best Picture nomination with 6. So that's more rare than not. So most of the times if you get a lot of nominations, it makes sense that you get a Best Picture nomination as well, and it has that sort of duality of the below the line support but also above the line support. So I think Sound of Metal has been coming on as of late and will surprise and get in that 9th spot. And then in the 10th slot I went with News of the World. Now I've always been sort of a champion of News of the World, but you have to eventually just look at the facts and see what's been presented to you, and News of the World is been disappointing. Not getting in at BAFTA for Best Film, but more importantly, not getting in at PGA in those top 10 really hurts the movie's chances. I still think at the end of the day that this is still an Oscars movie. It's an old-fashioned kind of a movie, and those members of the Academy will appreciate it. It has a lot of industry support in terms of the guilds, and I expect it to get a lot of technical nominations. I believe I have it right now for 5, but that's including Best Picture, so that could be hit or miss. And then even a couple of the tech categories, something like editing, which I thought it was a shoo-in for, missed out on Ace Eddie, and that was a big snub. So more generally, the movie just isn't as well liked as we think. But that being said, I still believe it because I think the Academy will enjoy this picture, that there is a chance because of the strong technical support that it has, that it gets in for picture. So that's why I have it here in the 10th slot. But like I said, there's probably only going to be 8 or 9 nominations in this category if I had to predict. Then Best Actress, I have Viola Davis, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Frances McDormand, Nomadland, Carey Mulligan, Promising Young Woman, Vanessa Kirby, Pieces of a Woman, and Andra Day, The United States versus Billie Holiday. The top 4 seem like locks, so Viola, Frances, Carey, and Vanessa, because they got BAFTA, they got SAG, they've sort of been getting in everywhere. I mean, even someone like Vanessa Kirby, which we thought maybe would slip out, even got in at BAFTA with that odd jury system. So, you know, we do have to kind of ignore that, but I think if anything, it's a sign of someone like Vanessa Kirby. So we look at the SAG 5, which was those 4 women and Amy Adams, which I still think is a very real possibility, but Hillbilly Elegy we know was sort of more of a divisive movie, is maybe not as well liked as some people. You know, it's sort of divisive in that way. Some people really like it, but some people don't. And ultimately I went with that 5th slot with Andra Day. And I went with her because of her Globes win. I think this is a scenario where even though the Golden Globes don't share voting members with the Academy, I think her surprise win and her speech prompts a lot of people to watch that movie. And frankly, the consensus when you watch that movie is it's an okay movie, but she is really great in it. So I think with that win, it prompted a lot more people to watch the movie. And I think given that they did watch the movie, they'll probably really enjoy her performance there. So it's weird because she has no sort of industry precursors, yet it seems to be sort of like a safe 5 in that sense. I do feel confident Andra Day sort of fits into the last spot, but I'm the world's biggest Amy Adams fan, so I'd love to see her get another nomination. Best Actor, I have Anthony Hopkins for The Father, Gary Oldman, Mank, Chadwick Boseman, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Stephen Yeun for Minari, Riz Ahmed for Sound of Metal. So here I'm going with the SAG 5 because I just think it's the most plausible. I'm a little bit concerned of someone like Tahar Rahim because of the success of the Mauritanian at BAFTA, which was interesting. And if you like that movie, well, you definitely like Tahar Rahim. He's a really standout performance from that movie. But the thing is that I don't know if it's going to be Stephen Yeun who misses or Gary Oldman that misses. It's kind of hard to judge that way. So ultimately, I just went with the SAG 5. I think it's more plausible than not. I think Tahar Rahim is a serious spoiler, but I'm not exactly sure who to sort of leave out. And I could definitely see a world where the SAG 5 just translate because of the success of movies like Mank and Minari and The Father more generally. Best Supporting Actress, I have Maria Bakalova, Borat's subsequent movie film, Olivia Colman, The Father, Glenn Close, Hillbilly Elegy, Jodie Foster, The Mauritanian, and Yeun for Minari. Now this is maybe the most up in the air, above the line category. I mean, there's really not a lot to go off of, but I think there's sort of like a 6 or 7 kind of people that we think are going to get in, and then some couple spoilers. You know, for something like the Best Actor, I went with the SAG 5. I didn't for Best Lead Actress, and similarly here, the Oscars don't always sort of translate with SAG. That it's always a good precursor or indicator, but the smart prognosticators I think are the ones we're able to look at performances that maybe got in at SAG that were like, okay, those are SAG ones and the Oscars are going to go their own way, and then try to find out what is going to go their own way. So someone like Helena Zengel comes to mind because News of the World just has been underperforming more generally as a movie, so I don't think she's going to get in that final slot. I have someone here like Maria Bakalova because she won Critics' Choice. Now, she didn't win that Golden Globe, which was interesting, but frankly, she won Critics' Choice. She even got in at BAFTA. She's been getting in everywhere. She is a strong critical darling, more so even than someone like Ethan Hawke, her first performer. They're really going behind Maria Bakalova, and with the strength of the film, because of its PGA nomination, I think that allows her to slip in. Olivia Colman for The Father. I think The Father is generally well liked, and she is very well liked and has that sort of recency bias to get her in. Glenn Close, a similar thing, although it's more of a legacy bias in that sense. It's been nominated so many times, does a sort of big performance. If you like that movie, you definitely like her performance in it. So I think Glenn gets in there. Yeun for Minari, I think, is another sort of safe bet. I think the fact that she got in for SAG is really helpful, and the fact that her movie has been doing so well really helps her chances. And then that sort of final slot, I went with Jodie Foster for The Mauritanian because I think The Mauritanian is really beloved. I mean, it got in for Best Film, it got in for Best Cinematography, Best Screenplay at BAFTA. I mean, the British bloc of the Academy really likes this movie. So I looked at my predictions and I go, where do I think this support will go? What's the most plausible situation? I think the most plausible situation is Jodie Foster. Now, it could get in for Screenplay, it could also get in for Tahar Rahim and Jodie Foster, but I think Jodie Foster is the most easy to sort of allow myself to predict, because I want to show the Mauritanian support somewhere. So I went with Jodie Foster because she won that Golden Globe, which I think was helpful, similar to Andra Day in terms of making people watch the movie and people sort of getting permission to go, I really like Jodie Foster in that. I really just like Jodie Foster. I want to nominate her. It's also important that she is more really a lead in the movie, and that particularly helps in the supporting categories. So I think even though she didn't get SAG, didn't get some of the precursors, she will sort of surprise and feels like a sort of an Oscar pick in that sense, where they maybe are not so crazy about the movie, but you know what, Jodie Foster's in, so we give it to the recognizable name. And the big kind of snub in this case would be someone like Amanda Seyfried for Mank, the once presumed frontrunner, missing out on SAG, and then more generally the movie losing support above the line. I think that maybe she's a little bit too young. She may have a little bit bias going against it that way. She could get in, definitely, because this category, like I said, is so up in the air. I'm not really confident in these picks. But that being said, she just hasn't shown right now anything that indicates to me that she should be nominated. She was the front runner, yes, but right now she's been losing a lot of steam and she hasn't been getting anything that she really needed to get, and I think that ultimately hurts her chances. Then I have Best Supporting Actor. I went with Daniel Kaluuya, Judas and the Black Messiah, David Strathairn, Nomadland, Leslie Odom Jr., One Night in Miami, Paul Raci, Sound of Metal, and Sacha Baron Cohen, The Trial of the Chicago 7. So the top three, I think, are locked in Kaluuya, Odom Jr., and Sacha Baron Cohen, because they've gotten in everywhere, and their movies are very well liked. That fourth slot, I went with Paul Raci, because I'm betting on the movie to be well liked, frankly. I think he has the critical support, we know that. He didn't get it in SAG, which really hurts him, but I think the movie's peaking at the right time. I think it's a well-liked movie. I think if you watch the movie, you will realize and sort of come out of the movie saying, like, who's that guy? Riz Ahmed's great, yes, but Paul Raci is also terrific in it. It seems to be also a situation where he hasn't been getting in everywhere, so the Oscars may want to go, hey, we really like this guy, we want to be the first to recognize him. So I'm betting on the movie, I'm betting on that sort of factor to happen, but really I'm betting on that strength in the movie. And then also, similar situation with my fifth slot, a sort of dark horse out of the way pick, and David Strathairn for Nomadland. I predict that Nomadland will overperform. It's been doing so well, overperforming at each industry award and each BAFTA and everything. It's been doing so well, winning all these awards. Clear frontrunner, in my opinion. So when it comes to Oscar nominations night, I think people are going to go, you know, I just really like this movie. And I think that the fifth and fourth sort of supporting actor slots are really up in the air. There's no clear sort of person that's supposed to quote-unquote go there. They could double nominate Chadwick Boseman, but that would be the only nomination for Da 5 Bloods in my prediction, so I'd feel a little bit uncomfortable doing that. Even someone like Alan Kim for Minari would be statistically rare, just because they very rarely nominate young boys in this category. And I think David Strathairn will ride off the success of Nomadland and ride off the fact that he's been a long-standing working character actor who's worked with a lot of people within the Academy, and and other actors have benefited off that fact. Someone like Willem Dafoe or Gary Oldman, these sort of long-standing character actors finally getting their due, finally getting their recognition. I think David Strathairn may be surprises to a lot of people, but not for you and the people who watch this video, and for me, which I think was going to actually happen. Then I have Best Director, David Fincher, Mank, Lee Isaac Chung, Minari, Chloe Zhao, Nomadland, Emerald Fennell, Promising Young Woman, and Aaron Sorkin for The Trial of Chicago 7. So despite me really wanting to go with some sort of surprise, I went with the DGA 5. Now, the Directors Guild nominations are very rarely going 5 for 5 with the Oscars. That doesn't always happen. But the frank thing is that sometimes it does happen, sometimes it does translate, and I just can't pick a fifth slot. I mean, that fifth slot, if I were to replace, it's like, who would I replace? Well, I think Aaron Sorkin is vulnerable. He does sort of seem like a Peter Farrelly or a Martin McDonagh kind of a type, but those people were replaced by directors who were well-liked and whose movies were well-liked. In this case, it's like, okay, Regina King for One Night in Miami. That movie seems to be slipping more generally in terms of the conversation, not getting in that screenplay at BAFTA, things like that. And also, Regina King not getting a DGA, I actually think hurts her chances as well. So maybe she slips in and replaces someone like Aaron Sorkin, but she could also replace someone like Emerald Fennell, who is more of an unknown director. And then there could be a European surprise, someone like Florian Zeller or Darius Martyr, but I think they cancel out because of the strength of the movies are relatively similar and they're both a European kind of a sexy factor to it. I could very well see Paul Greengrass, frankly, just because even though News of the World has really been disappointing, which is why I left it off, I still think that they like their guys that they've nominated before. Now, they've nominated David Fincher for Mank before, so it kind of solidifies that rule in that sense, but very rarely do they go 1 for 5 and 4 of them are first-time nominees. Oftentimes they go with established people. So if there is a surprise, don't be totally surprised if someone like Paul Greengrass gets in for director and then the movie maybe doesn't even get in for Best Picture. But I'm using my head and going with the DGA 5. Then we have Best Original Screenplay, Mank, Minari, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. So I think those sort of top 4 are pretty locked because they either have a WGA or BAFTA or critical appreciation or all 3. So those 4 being Trial of Chicago 7, Promising Young Woman, Mank, and Minari. All sort of fitting the sort of slots and something like Promising Young Woman and Trial and Mank got in BAFTA, but Minari feels like the A24 original screenplay slot always goes to one of their movies, and the movie is very well liked, so I expect that to get it in here as well. And ultimately that 5th slot, I went with Sound of Metal because to me it was like, which movie do you like better in terms of its Oscar chances? Judas and Black Messiah or Sound of Metal? You could have gone Judas here and then Judas in Picture and then maybe even Judas in Director and things like that. But ultimately I looked at it and I go, well, Judas has almost a guaranteed supporting actor win in something like Daniel Kaluuya. But what it doesn't have is more general support, where something like Sound of Metal, it's like almost a guaranteed win in sound, and maybe gets in editing, and Riz Ahmed is almost a guarantee, and Paul Raci could get in, and it got in at PGA, and these things sort of pile up. So ultimately it was like Judas and the Black Messiah or Sound of Metal for that final screenplay nod, and I went with Sound of Metal because I'm more confident in the strength of that film. Then for Best Adapted Screenplay, I have Borat, Subsequent Movie Film, The Father, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Nomadland, and One Night in Miami. Now this category is a little bit more difficult. The top 2 picks I think are Nomadland and The Father because they've been getting in everywhere and do have probably the most strongest on Oscar-y kind of chances. And the next 2 picks I think are locks too, although they disappointed at BAFTA, which is not a huge surprise because they're both particularly African-American in particular stories, so maybe that doesn't resonate with the British Academy. But I do think that they will resonate with the Oscars, and those 2 movies getting at PGA show the strength of those movies, but they're similar in the sense that both based on plays, so I pair them up because of that reason. And then the final slot is really up in the air. I kind of went with my gut and went with Borat. Borat had a WGA nomination, but that's really it. I'm going off the fact that the first Borat actually got an original screenplay nomination, and the second Borat is more well-liked. It's a comedy movie, so it has sort of the funny jokes, which is more often appreciated in an original screenplay, but could also be celebrated here and adapted. Once again, that PGA nomination really going off the strength of that, and someone like Maria Bakalova getting all this critical support, and its success at the Golden Globes more generally. And then There's a couple other slots I could really see it go to. I mean, the Mauritanian makes a lot of sense because of its success at BAFTA and seems like a sort of adaptation, kind of a Oscar type because of how well it did. Like I said, at BAFTA, getting it at Best Film, I mean, that's not something we want to ignore. I think the biggest, actually, spoiler would probably be The White Tiger. I can very easily see that happening because Priyanka Chopra, who's in the movie, is presenting at the Oscars, but also it got in at BAFTA, it got in at WGA, so that probably makes actually the most sense. If you want to go for it, go for The White Tiger. We know people enjoy that movie, backed by Netflix, a lot of things going forward. It does sort of have an original kind of a rags to riches kind of a story, crime story, but ultimately I went with Borat because I think it seems the most plausible for me. I'm not totally confident in this final slot. I kind of want to go White Tiger, but ultimately I went with Borat because it makes the most sense to me. It's kind of a gut pick for me, and I think the movie more generally is well liked, so I'm kind of betting on that. Then I have Best Cinematography. I've got Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, News of the World, Nomadland, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. So the top three, in my opinion, are News of the World, Nomadland, and Mank. They've gotten everywhere for critics and BAFTA and got in at the American Society of Cinematographers. So lock in those three. Now, the American Society of Cinematographers sort of gave a huge surprise, and their final two slots, they went to The Trial of Chicago 7 and Carey. Now, the American Society of Cinematographers is a very good indicator as to what will get nominated at the Oscars, but they don't always go 5 for 5. A couple of years they've gone for 5 for 5, but most of the time 4 out of the 5 get nominated at the Oscars. So it's kind of picking now, okay, so I've got those three, those are locks. Well, is it Carey or Trial of Chicago 7? You kind of got to pick one. Ultimately, I think I went with Trial of Chicago 7 because two things. First, it's a well-liked Best Picture frontrunner in many ways, you know, second or third in that race. Definitely a Best Picture contender, but also was done by Fiona and Papa Michael. And if you know anything about this category, you know that, like many of the tech categories, they like to nominate people they've nominated before. So if you don't have Trial of Chicago 7 and have something like Carey, and something as well as something like Judas and the Black Messiah, well, then you think that there's going to be all first-time nominees, which is very rare, which hasn't happened, I don't think, ever, or at the very least, in a long time. There's almost always one nomination or two nominations from people that have been nominated before. So that's why I went with Trial of Chicago 7 to get Fiona and Papa Michael in there ultimately, and the movie's so well liked, and it got the ASC. It does make sense in that respect. And then I also went with Judas and the Black Messiah because I think the movie should have some sort of technical support. It does have flashy cinematography, fits that kind of a bill. Also from cinematographer Sean Bobbitt, who at one got sort of snubbed a few years ago for 12 Years a Slave when he got all the precursors and then missed out at the Oscars. So I think this is kind of either you can interpret it two ways. Either they don't like him or they sort of want to reward him here again. I sort of feel better about the latter. Then Best Editing, I went with Mank, Nomadland, The Trial of Chicago 7, Promising Young Woman, and Sound of Metal. So the Ace Eddie nominations, they came out yesterday and they cleared a lot of things up. First, Nomadland, Trial of Chicago 7, and Promising Young Woman, I think, in my opinion, are probably the top three movies in terms of chances of winning Best Picture. But that being said, and we know that the editing category is directly linked to Best Picture oftentimes, that if you're going to win Best Picture, you have to get that editing nomination, so that makes more sense for those movies. They all got in at BAFTA, they all got in at the Ace Eddie Awards, and sort of fit the correct molds. Then I went with Sound of Metal because it also got in at Ace, Eddie, and BAFTA. I was unsure about it because it doesn't have a lot of flashy editing, but clearly there's a lot of support of how the subjective camera is used and how it's sort of edited to tell you it from Riz Ahmed's character Ruben from his perspective. So that feels also safe to me too. And then my fifth slot, I've been really debating this. I've been going back and forth. I just changed it right before the video a couple hours ago, and ultimately I went with Mank. Now, both Mank and I think the other option was Minari. Now, you can sort of decide on Minari because it is more well-liked than Mank. It has a higher likelihood of winning Best Picture, and if you think the editing is so directly connected with Best Picture, well then you should probably go with Minari. But my sort of thinking behind it was that, okay, they both got Ace Eddie, but Mank got some critics' choice, so it has a little bit more support that way. It also has more flashy editing. I mean, Sound of Metal, Trials of Chicago 7, Nomadland, they don't really have flashy editing. Promising Young Woman is entertaining, but it's not very flashy. Minari is definitely not flashy. It's very subtle. It's very sort of straightforward. But Mank, you're talking about flashbacks and different timelines and doing sort of transitions as to the old time period. So that really helped it. I also don't think it's a totally lost cause Best Picture contender. I mean, it will get a lot of nominations, and I think, particularly in these below the line categories, it will show some of its support. It's also, I think that there's that factor, but then why I went with Mank, but also the additional factor, it's edited by Kirkpatrick. Now, this is a guy who's been nominated 3 times. He's won twice before. He's well respected within the industry. So I think that factor of just like, this guy is really well liked. He's won twice before. His movie is kind of on the cusp. It's gotten the precursors of Ace. It missed out on BAFTA, which was unfortunate, but so did something like Minari. I think The Father, which got in at BAFTA, but didn't get it at Ace Eddie Awards, hurts it more, actually. So I'd have probably The Father in 7th place. That could definitely get in for sure. But for me, it was like Mank or Minari. I just went with Mank because it has a little bit more flashy editing and has more of a respected editor. But that was really difficult for me. Then Best Animated Feature, I went with The Croods: A New Age, Onward, Over the Moon, Soul, and Wolfwalkers. So the top 3 are really clear. It's Soul, Wolfwalkers, and Onward. I'd be shocked if any of those don't get nominated because they've been getting in everywhere. The other movie that's kind of been surprising and getting in everywhere is The Croods, in terms of Globes, in terms of getting sort of both Sound Editors Guild nominations, art directors, things like that. It has been doing very well. So even though it's a sequel and they're usually against sequels, it seems to be that this is sort of the big studio kind of a movie that, aside from maybe something like Soul, that gets nominated and does well. They also nominated the first Croods movie, so we know they like this franchise. And even though I didn't really want to do it, it's been showing up everywhere, even got in at Ace Eddie too, so that helps it. And then ultimately my final pick, which I think is up in the air, I went with Over the Moon, which is kind of the safe pick, and I don't feel great about it because Over the Moon has been missing in a lot of places. Didn't get song, for example. It didn't get art direction. I mean, there's a couple things where you go, this just doesn't make any sense, like why it missed out. You know, it got in at, I think, the Motion Picture Sound Editors, but didn't get in at Cinema Audio Society. So it's like, is it this? Or is it Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon? Now, Shaun the Sheep Farmageddon, they like stop motion, we know that, but it's a sequel. Will they really nominate 2 sequels in Croods 2 and Shaun the Sheep? I'm not exactly sure. Over the Moon has been disappointing, but it's also by Netflix, and I think a Netflix movie will fill in that 5th and final slot. Now, then you can go, okay, is it Over the Moon or is it The Willoughbys? Well, Over the Moon has definitely the most campaigning. The director is a Disney animation legend in Glenn Keane, so maybe the branch will appreciate that, but it is more, the voting is done by sort of the entire Academy, so it's not just like an animation-specific branch. So it's hard to say where that is. I think I just went with Over the Moon because it's just a default choice. I don't feel great about it, but I'm not exactly I wouldn't feel great about Shaun the Sheep. Maybe an anime film will get in, something like Ride Your Wave. I think is a real long shot, but could be a spoiler. It's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But so I just sort of went with a chalk pick because I wasn't sure what to do, and I went with Over the Moon. Then I have Best Documentary here, and my nominees are All In, The Fight for Democracy, Collective, Dick Johnson Is Dead, The Octopus Teacher, and The Truffle Hunters. And man, oh man, has this been an exhausting category. I think out of all the categories, this is probably the hardest to predict. I think there are really like 10 movies that you could predict, and I wouldn't be surprised if any of them got in. The documentary branch is usually always interesting to pick and hard to predict because there's always some sort of spoiler that happens. I have that coming up. I'll be talking about that later. So I'm just going to go one by one and explain quickly why I chose that, because like I said, these 5, you may not have any of these 5 in your nominations, and frankly that could be completely okay. But I'll tell you why I went with mine. So we have here All In, The Fight for Democracy. So this is backed by Amazon. Streamers like Hulu, Amazon, Netflix generally do well in this documentary category because they're often cited for sort of reviving the documentary in popular consciousness, and that sort of streaming element, it makes it very easy to watch. The movie is about voter suppression, which is a relevant topic most recently with the US presidential election, which was always sort of on voters' minds, and still sort of vote allegations have continued to persist. So it feels relevant and timely of its time. It's also, one of the nominees of the movie is Stacey Abrams, who is a rising star within the Democratic Party. So I think the fact that the Oscar voters will be able to vote for Stacey Abrams, who will be able to actually give Stacey Abrams potentially an Oscar nomination. I don't think they're going to pass that up. I think that based on the fact that it's being campaigned by Amazon, gives its strength. It's also contending in Best Original Song, which I have it there. A topic that feels relevant, is also political, and they like those kinds of movies. So an American particular fan base will appreciate this, and we know mostly Americans are in the Academy. Even though they're becoming more and more international, they still have a large American voting base, so I think that will help it. Then I have Collective here, which has really been doing really well in both international feature category and documentary, of which I have it in both. But in more particular, it's been doing very well in the documentary category. I think that it's really sort of been showing up everywhere, either an international feature or documentary feature. I think that broader support will help it actually get nominated in both categories. It got an BAFTA, it got an IDA. If anything, it has a better shot at documentary, and I think that it's a movie that has been talked about and we've seen throughout industry awards, whether it be an international or documentary, it has been getting nominated. So I think it has a higher chance in documentary than anything. So I still think the Collective gets in for documentary as well. Then I have Dick Johnson Is Dead, which is a personal favorite of mine, so maybe there's a little bit of bias there, but also it's been getting in really everywhere. It got in at PGA, it got in at the Ace Eddie Awards, it got in at Critics' Choice. It has Netflix behind them, which always helps. I mean, usually every year there's at least one Netflix movie to get nominated in this category, sometimes two. I have two coming up. There's usually one movie each year that's sort of more fun and less politically relevant, so I went with Dick Johnson Is Dead, although I went with a couple of those, so maybe I'm a little bit too naive in that sense, but it has Netflix, which helps. It has a lot of campaigning, high quality from critical support, but also been showing up in key places like PGA, like the Ace Eddie Award. Then my next pick is another Netflix movie, In the Octopus Teacher, and this is actually the most well-nominated out of all the documentaries. I actually feel very confident in this, even though it was sort of an outsider's pick. It got in at BAFTA, it got in at DGA, it got in at PGA, it got in at Critics' Choice. It's been getting in everywhere. It's got the support of Netflix. It seems to be sort of like a groundswell sweeping movie. It could very well win this category if it does get nominated. It has kind of a viral, shocking quality to it because of that connection between the octopus and the man. It's very fascinating. It's a very interesting documentary. I think it will resonate to members of the Academy. I don't think they're going to forget about it. And you look at the precursors, it's been getting in everywhere. So you'd be kind of dumb not to predict it, I think. And then my final nomination, I went with The Truffle Hunters. It's being distributed by Sony Pictures Classics, which really only has this and The Father as real sort of contenders in this year. So that is fascinating that they're really putting a lot of support behind it. It's got great cinematography. It is sort of a feel-good kind of interesting odd couple situation, and feels very real. Feels very human. It also has a solid combination, a very clear, often predictor of getting in at both PGA and DGA, so we know it has industry support that way from a company that has done well for Oscar campaigns, and they don't really have a lot of movies this year, so they've been putting effort into The Truffle Hunters. Like I said, it is a little bit more lighthearted, and so is even The Octopus Teacher and Dick Johnson Is Dead. They're not really political movies in that sense, so maybe something like Boy State gets in. And the big spoiler that I don't have is Time. I don't think that's going to get in. I know it's been critically appreciated, but it's been getting in nowhere. I mean, its surprise not nomination at the Ace Eddie Awards is really telling, I think, of the strength of that movie. I think that's a critical darling. I don't think that will show up, and usually every year there's a critical darling in documentary and sort of surprises and doesn't show up. This year I'm predicting that to be Time. Then Best Production Design, I have Mank, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, The Midnight Sky, News of the World, and Tenet. So in my opinion, the sort of three locks are News of the World, Mank, and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, because they got the two precursors of Art Directors Guild and Set Directors Guild and got in at BAFTA, so I expect that to continue. Then I went with The Midnight Sky for that fourth slot because this branch, particularly within the Academy, loves sci-fi movies that oftentimes, whether it be something like A First Man or Interstellar, the production design of these sci-fi movies get in because they sort of like that element of big budget sci-fi intellectual sort of space movies, and The Midnight Sky sort of fits that slot this year, a big budget Netflix movie, and has a sort of duality of being on the Arctic but also being up in the space station, and some of the design and the sets that are going on there. So it's been slipping recently because of its poor BAFTA performance, but even then it got both guilds. So I think the Oscars, because it got both guilds and because they have a little bit more of a preference to sci-fi movies, and this is very much a sci-fi spacey movie, I think that it will get in, and I'm actually pretty confident it will get in. And then my fifth slot, I went with Tenet. In part because I feel confident in the movie, but also in part because I don't feel confident in any of the other nominations. Mulan for production design really has been disappointing within the guilds more generally. Something like Emma didn't get in at Art Directors Guild, which was very surprising, so that sort of knocks that out of the way. Personal History of David Copperfield has shown up nowhere, so it would be a big surprise if it showed up here. And Tenet didn't get in at BAFTA, which is surprising. The movie has been slipping, but it did get in at the Art Directors Guild in the important category. It's also by Nathan Crowley, who's been nominated, I think, 4 or 5 times for almost all of Christopher Nolan's movies, and has been nominated for these sort of non-Oscar Christopher Nolan movies. Something like Prestige comes to mind. So there's a pedigree behind it there. I think there's a lot of sort of jealousy within even production designers that he can do this because there's not sort of original movies that you can create your own set and do it on this big scale and crash a plane. I think there's a lot of respect that comes with him and Christopher Nolan's collaboration. So I sort of went with there. If you want a spoiler, go with Rebecca because a similar situation from Sarah Greenwood, who's been nominated many times before, and it showed up BAFTA, so it has some industry support. But the fact that it didn't show up at either Set Directors or Art Directors Guild is a little bit concerning to me, which is why I didn't go with Rebecca, and I went with Tenet because I respect ultimately those guilds a little bit more. Best costume design, I have Ammonite, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mulan, Mank, and Emma. So the locks for me are Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Emma, and pretty much Mank. They all got in at the Costume Designers Guild and Critics' Choice and BAFTA, all 3 of them. So they feel pretty safe. Mank less so, just because I was like, Mank may slip in a couple of these places, and it may slip there, but oftentimes there's a direct correlation between costume design and production design, and I have Mank winning production design, so it makes sense for it to get costume design, and it hasn't told me to go otherwise because it's been nominated over and over and over again. Same thing with Ma Rainey, same thing with Emma. Then my 4th slot, I went with Mulan because frankly, it just makes sense. When I saw the movie, I was like, there's beautiful costumes, period piece, colorful, very unique, sort of typical sort of Chinese, but also mixed with some fantasy elements. A lot of creativity going on there. It just seemed like a costume designer's movie. Now it got into the guild and only missed BAFTA, so I'm not too worried about it. But also, when I think of the movie, I think of, Disney live action pedigree has actually been really good. Maleficent got in, Cinderella got in, Beauty and the Beast got in, so it wouldn't be a surprise to me if Mulan got in for costume design. And the Costume Designers Guild never really goes 5 for 5, and there's always one sort of surprise movie in that sense. And for me, actually, Mulan did get in Costume Designers Guild, but the surprise for me is Ammonite, which got in at BAFTA. This is from Michael Carter, who was a previous winner and had been nominated before for these sort of 19th century period pieces, and for movies that you wouldn't be sort of expect to get in, something like The Invisible Woman, which gets in the BAFTA and then gets in at the Oscars. I think the Ammonite will have a similar sort of trajectory. I mean, this is a movie that has always been in the Oscar contention. We thought maybe Saoirse Ronan, maybe Kate Winslet, but it's sort of fallen over the coming months, so it does make sense that it were to get ultimately something, and with it showing up at BAFTA, that sort of gave me the chance, because it goes, it makes sense. It's a 19th century period piece. It has been campaigning in a lot of different categories. It hasn't been getting anything, but it has been campaigning for them. Costume design feels like the most sense, and that BAFTA sort of gives me that extra confirmation for it. So sometimes, when you look at the guilds, you go, okay, I feel confident in BAFTA. Sometimes you go, I feel confident in the Art Directors Guild and the Costume Designers Guild, but in this case, there's not a clear 5th slot, so you have to kind of go with the one that you think that makes the most sense. And if you look at it on paper, a movie with 2 beloved Oscar favorites, which maybe won't get any other nominations, but has been campaigning and has great period accurate costumes from a previous winner, it sort of just all makes sense. So I went with Ammonite in my final slot. Then Best Makeup and Hairstyling, I have Birds of Prey, Hillbilly Elegy, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Mank, and Pinocchio. The three locks here are Hillbilly Elegy, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and Pinocchio, because they've been getting in important places, Makeup and Hairstyling Guild, BAFTA, and Pinocchio sort of fits that mold of being the foreign, odd, prosthetic-heavy kind of a movie from a previous winner, so I feel confident in all of those. Mank could be snowed, but I kind of just went with it as a default because it's a Best Picture nominee, and you know, not necessarily in this category, but more generally in these below-the-line categories, the Best Picture nominees do have a little bit of sway, and if you're unsure of where to go, I always kind of go there because they'll show up in some sort of surprise visual effects or something like that. So that's why I went it there. But also, you know, gone at BAFTA, it has gone on Makeup and Hairstyling Guild, it has the support, but if you just look at it on paper, you go, Makeup and Hairstyling, well, there's not a lot. What it is, though, it has Best Picture potential. It has the hairstyling branch. It doesn't have makeup, but it is sort of the hairstyling pick, and we've seen picks like Victoria and Abdul do well because of that hairstyling branch. So Mank seems to sort of fit into that branch there, but it's kind of difficult to say at the same time. And then I went with Birds of Prey as my final nomination here because of the makeup, because of Christmas Eve's platinum blonde hair, or sort of the makeup even on someone like Harley Quinn and developing that design. It's a colorful film with a lot of characters and unique elements to it. If you want to go with a surprise pick, you could go with something like The Glorias or Emma. Birds of Prey seems to be a little bit more makeup, and in a year where we have something like Mari's Black Bottom, Hillbilly Elegy, which is smaller things, and Pinocchio, which is a big prosthetic thing, there seems to be sort of maybe a little of a happy medium ground. Go with a superhero movie, go with Birds of Prey. Then we're here in Best Score. I have Mank, Minari, The Midnight Sky, News of the World, and Soul. I'm pretty confident in these five. All got in at BAFTA except for Midnight Sky, and Minari got in at BAFTA but didn't get at the Globes, but The Midnight Sky got in at Globes and didn't get at BAFTA. Minari makes sense because oftentimes in this category, while they like their favorites, oftentimes a newcomer, at least one, gets in, and Minari for Emile Mosseri would be the first, it would be the only, first-time nominee within this category. You know, so if I went with something like Tenet for a little bit granted, then it'd be 5 for 5 all-time previous nominees, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. They're usually like one newcomer, so they'll give it to Minari with the strength of the film and the strength of the composer. But with that final slot, I went with The Midnight Sky because Alexander Desplat is very well liked, and if they have a chance to nominate Alexander Desplat, they will, and it makes sense getting in Globes. And missing out on BAFTA, yes, but it does seem like a little bit more of an American movie, and I do expect Desplat to get nominated. Those five I'm pretty confident in, and I wouldn't probably change it and swap out anything. Best Original Song, I have Turntable, All In, The Fight for Democracy, Husavik from Eurovision Song Contest, Fight for You from Judas and the Black Messiah, Io, Scene from The Life Ahead, Speak Now from One Night in Miami, and it's kind of a strange category, but you kind of have to look at the Globes and the strength of the film, so I'll just go quickly through why I have each one. So I have something like Speak Now because you have to look at this category, you have to look at common trends that we've seen in previous years because we don't have a lot of those indicators, so you have to look at past Oscar years, and what we see often is an actor getting nominated and then their song that they sing getting nominated as well, something like Mary J. Blige with Mudbound. Similar situation here. I expect Leslie Odom Jr. to get nominated. I expect Speak Now to follow suit. I also expect One Night in Miami to get a Best Picture nomination, so that helps. And then also movies that have sort of other nominations help. So something like Judas and the Black Messiah for Fight for You, or Turntables, All in the Fight for Democracy. I have those movies getting other nominations, so that helps in terms of they like the movie, we know that, so maybe they'll really like the song too. And in particular, those two songs also are sung by celebrities. Janelle Monáe, which is very well liked at the Oscars for All in the Fight for Democracy song, Turntables, and then Fight for You from Judas and the Black Messiah is sung by her, H-E-R. So there's a celebrity factor too, and the Oscars aren't necessarily above that. And then you have to look at the songwriter sometimes. So that's why I have Scene from The Life Ahead, which is written by Diane Warren, who's been nominated 11 times without a win. She also has the one and only Ivan song, Free, maybe going to get nominated too. It's one of those situations where if she writes a song for your movie, oftentimes it has a very good chance of getting nominated. It also won the Golden Globe, so I expect that to get nominated as well. And then The kind of final fifth slot, I went with Husavik from Eurovision Song Contest. The fact that the town itself of Husavik is sort of campaigning for the movie. Oftentimes we see musical numbers in this group. It's not just end credits songs, so I think that makes Husavik stand out because Eurovision is a musical, and it plays at the sort of climactic moment of the movie, so it fits well within the story of the movie. It's, like I said, just not just an end credits song, and it's from a comedy, yes, but this is also the group that shortlisted Wuhan Flu from Borat's subsequent movie film, so I think they feel a little bit more comfortable with a comedy song, and I think Husavik makes sense in that way. Then I have Best Sound. I have Greyhound, News of the World, Nomadland, Soul, Sound of Metal. And the locks here are Sound of Metal, Greyhound, and News of the World because they got in at both Sound Guilds and at BAFTAs. Then with my fourth slot, I went with Soul, and Soul I put in here because of its BAFTA recognition, which I think really helps that movie. It's hard to judge its competition at the other guilds because it got both other guilds, but it's competing in animated, so it's hard to see it that way. But its BAFTA recognition I think really helps. I also think that's a movie, if you think about music, about sound, about passion, so I think it will resonate with the sound guild. And seems always most like a sound mixing kind of representation, so it makes sense to put it in there as well. And then in the final slot, I went with a big kind of surprise. I went with Nomadland. Now, it's not a huge surprise because it got in for BAFTA, but no one's really predicting it. Nothing special about Nomadland's sound in particular, but there's a couple things that I think are notable. First, the BAFTA nomination, which was interesting. It also got a supporting nomination in motion picture sound editors, so it's not completely out of the way. It's also a movie that I think will be overperforming. I mean, I think it's going to get in for David Strathairn. I also think it could get in here and surprise and be like, yes, Nomadland is a clear frontrunner, sort of like a Roma situation where it surprises and gets in a couple of these odder categories just because the movie is so well liked. Also, unfortunately, the sound mixer killed himself recently. So that kind of news came out and that story broke out, so maybe they want to honor him by giving him a nomination. That would be great to see, and it was an unfortunate situation, but you know, those are some of the factors and storylines we have to consider when making these nominations, so those extra add factors may help Nomadland get over the finish line. Then I have Best Visual Effects. I've got Mank, Midnight Sky, The One and Only Ivan, Tenet, and Welcome to Chechnya. So the solid locks, in my opinion, are both Tenet and The Midnight Sky. Even though the movies have been sort of slipping, even at something like BAFTA, they both got nominated visual effects. They also got nominated in important categories of the Visual Effects Society, so that's important. So BAFTA and visual effects, that combination, lock those two in. Welcome to Chechnya, I think, is also in a semi-lock. It didn't get in at BAFTA, which is unfortunate, but it's shortlisted for Best Documentary at the Oscars as well as this category. It also got an important nomination at the Visual Effects Society. It's also very unique, and it fits a sort of a unique slot within these five. The fact that it's using deepfake technology for a social issue to protect the LGBTQ community in Russia that are facing persecution. So it's sort of doing it for a social change. It's a different kind of visual effects. It's unique. It's not always what they've seen before. I think they'll wow a lot of the members within the Academy in this branch. So I think Welcome to Chechnya makes sense. Then I have The One and Only Ivan, which I think its BAFTA recognition really put it over the edge for me. It didn't do very well at VES, which was surprising, but like I said, got that BAFTA nomination and fits a kind of mold of this category, oftentimes with movies like Christopher Robin or the Planet of the Apes trilogy. A main character that's CGI that interacts with humans is often well appreciated when done well, and I think The One and Only Ivan will be well appreciated as sort of the gorilla characters interacting with the humans and that sort of connection and how they're able to build it ultimately for the story. That's not just visual effects, it's visual effects for the story, and that will help the movie overall. So I actually kind of feel confident that The One and Only Ivan, I've always been predicting it, and I was just waiting for it to sort of get its due, and then once it got the BAFTA recognition, I sort of sighed a sigh of relief. I'm like, okay, it's not a totally crazy prediction, it makes sense. And then my fifth slot, I went with Mank, mostly because it's got a Best Picture element to it. It's pretty basic in terms of its set extending and things like that, so it's not totally revolutionary in that sense, but it's Best Picture nomination, and oftentimes in this category, the Best Picture nomination, oftentimes they get nominated, first of all, but oftentimes they win. So maybe this is Mank's sort of other win and surprise year, or maybe it surprises and doesn't get nomination, but for me, it's also a situation where I didn't want to go with Soul because it's an animated film, and very rarely do animated films ever get nominated for visual effects, and if they do, they are stop motion animated films. And then something like Bloodshot could also be a surprise, but that hasn't really gone in everywhere. There hasn't been a lot of sort of indicators as to what the other movie will be. Maybe it's Mulan, but it did hit BAFTA, but it missed out on a category of VES, which I thought was really important, and it's surprising that it didn't get in there. So I'm skeptical of Mulan. So I went with Mank. Maybe it's a big surprise, and Bloodshot, and you know, it wows everyone. But to me, I just went with Mank as sort of another default kind of a pick because of the Best Picture element, and because it's got a couple of precursors. Okay, one more category, and then the shorts. Here we have Best International Film. I have Another Round, Collective, I'm No Longer Here, Quoi va dire Seda, and Two of Us. So the two locks here, I think, are Another Round and Quoi va dire Seda. Another Round because it's been getting in pretty much everywhere and winning everywhere. Quoi va dire Seda. Similar situation, got in for Best Director along with Another Round at BAFTA, and getting in at BAFTA and other places as well. And distributed by Neon, who has always done well in this category and really will push for their movies and campaigns very well for their movies. So those are locks. The Two of Us, I also think, is a semi-lock because it just seems like the movie that the Oscars will nominate. Sort of a romantic, epic, grand European movie. Is a certain type of movie that the Oscars, particularly this category, this branch, likes to nominate. It got nominated at the Globes and Critics' Choice. So, and just personally, maybe there's not a lot of huge industry support for the movie, but it does sort of feel like, and it's France's entry of the year, so it does sort of feel like the type of movie that gets nominated, frankly, and that's kind of a dumb reasoning. But if you look at the type of movie, you look at past Oscar trends, there's a certain type of movie that gets nominated, and Two of Us is kind of fitting that mold. Then I went with Collective. I also mentioned it in my documentary category, just because a similar argument as why I put it in there, the more broader support of the movie. It either shows up for documentary or international feature, or sometimes both, at these both critics and industry awards. We know it's well liked. I think there's just a sort of general broad support for the movie, and I think it's going to get in because of that. And then my final nomination, I went with I'm No Longer Here, because they very rarely, I don't think they ever have gone 5 for 5 European movies. That oftentimes they'll go with a Mexican movie or Israeli or Guatemalan. They'll go with another sort of country that's not in Europe for that fifth and final slot, because they don't want to seem like all the movies are European and all there's a certain type of movie that they like. So I looked at it and I go, maybe it's La Llorona because of it's very well liked and has some interesting precursors, but it's horror, and I'm not 100% convinced that they're going to go with that. So I went with I'm No Longer Here because I think Netflix has often done well in this category. I don't think it's going to be a Sun because it has literally zero precursors, so I can't predict it. I don't feel comfortable in doing that, but I'm No Longer Here does. I think this sort of surprise first-time filmmaker DGA nomination shows the strength of the movie. It's been campaigning. It's from Netflix, so we know it has a strong campaign. It's more generally, I think, entertaining, and really documents the city of Mexico City, very well. And so it sort of fits my kind of category. So I kind of wanted to go with them like Dear Comrades, maybe. But frankly, I couldn't go with it because I don't think there's going to be all 5 European movies. So watch that in your predictions and make sure that you have a good balance in that way. Then for the short categories, just to more generally for all of them, I haven't seen all of them. I've seen some of them, but most of the time, I would pick them based on their name. There's not a lot of analysis to be done. Most of the time I just sort of pick them at random, so there's not a whole lot I can tell you about them. So I'm just going to go briefly, quickly name them and sort of say why, with the more sort of general rule for the category, and then why I picked them shortly. So Best Documentary Short. The rule for this category is just that movies with a big distributor often do well, so Netflix or things like that. So I have here A Concerto is a Conversation, which is just an interesting title, and we've seen movies with interesting titles not only get nominated but win. Something like Heaven is Like a Highway on the 405, something like that. So I have A Concerto is a Conversation. A Love Song for Latasha, interesting, maybe emotional. Abortion Helpline, This Is Lisa, very interesting title, that makes sense. The Speed Cubers, which is Netflix and long, sort of feels like a documentary. And What Would Sophia Loren Do, which is also Netflix, and once again, Sophia Loren is campaigning for the life ahead, so maybe she doesn't get in there, but she does get in for here. Best Animated Short, I have The more general dumb rule being that go with animals, that they love animals in this category. So I have Burrow, which is from Disney and has animals. If Anything Happens, I Love You, which is from Netflix and is socially charged and is emotional and is relevant. Kapamahu, maybe you pronounce it, is diverse. It has very unique animation too, which is important in this category. Out, which is a Disney movie and has animals in it. And my final one is a off-the-ball pick. I went with Traces because it has very unique animation, and sometimes we see these movies with very unique animation do well here. Then with Best Live Action Short, the rule more generally is that international movies often surprise and do well here, so don't always pick the English language movie. So I have The Human Voice, which is starring Tilda Swinton and directed by Pedro Almodovar, which big celebrities behind it, that helps. The Letter Room, Oscar Isaac, similar situation because it has Oscar Isaac in it. Feeling Through, which is an intimate and honest sort of matching of an odd pair and disabilities and talking about that. The Letter Room, which stars Oscar Isaac in it, so that I think we'll get in because of that. I have Two Distant Strangers, which is a politically relevant, Black Lives Matter relevant content, so I think that will resonate. And then finally I have Wide Eye, which is a critically acclaimed, socially relevant Israeli film, so I wanted to put at least one international kind of live action feature in, in there, so I went with Wide Eye. But that's it, everybody. Those are my predictions. A long video, I know, in every category, all 23 categories. I hope you appreciate it. Please give me a thumbs up for all the work I've done here and the work I've done throughout the channel, and that really helps the channel. And if you want to show your support, that helps. And including leaving your predictions in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you have something like Minari and editing and something over Mank? What are your thoughts on maybe some of my odd predictions of something like David Strathairn from Nomadland? I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.